Afternoon. Welcome, everybody. This is the next part of our Fulbright Friday series. We do this every spring once we open the Fulbright season to focus in on some more specific topics related to the Fulbright U.S. student program application process. And today we're going to be talking about strategies for cultivating effective references, an essential part of a good, strong Fulbright application. And so, yeah, we're going to hop into that. So, if you haven't met me already, my name's Kyle Mox. I'm Associate Dean for National Scholarships at Arizona State University, and I am the designated Fulbright Program Advisor, which means I'm the main point of contact between the Fulbright U.S. Student Program and our campus. If you're just getting familiar with Fulbright or just getting to know it, the basic facts to know is that, it's been around for 70 years. It's one of the oldest and best known international exchange programs in existence. It is a program of the U.S. Department of State. And generally speaking, you're applying for grants that would span an academic year. There's about 2,000 grants awarded each year to 140 different countries, and you can pursue opportunities to teach English in a foreign classroom, pursue a graduate degree, conduct a research project of your own design, or even artistic projects as well. So a lot of flexibility within Fulbright. And I think the important thing to remember is that Fulbright is done in partnership with the other countries, right? And so the main mission here is to promote mutual understanding through cultural exchange. The academic work, the research, the artistic work, these are just vehicles for that cultural exchange. And Fulbright wants to support you in supporting your goals, but more importantly, they want you to support the larger mission, which is to promote goodwill and understanding between different nations. In terms of timing, we're at the very beginning of the application cycle. We just opened up a couple of weeks ago, actually, the new application for the 2027-2028. Wow, application cycle is now open, and we haven't even yet concluded the results from the previous cycle. But we're at the left arrow, end of the arrow there, we are in the point at time in which most people are making decisions about grants, award types, strategies for that, choosing countries, and we're about to start writing our applications in earnest. So throughout the summer, ONSA is here to help you, to give you feedback on your drafts, to walk you through various parts of the application. And as well, we'll be having a number of programs throughout the summer, include Fulbright simulations, where you'll get to play the role of a national screening committee member and review real live applications and make a choice. Peer writing workshops, The Right Place, which is our weekly writing walk-in hours, all leading up to September 8th, which is our campus deadline. And at that point, you'll submit a complete application, including your references, for committee review, final feedback, and then final submission. So today's topic. We are focused in on the role that references and reference forms play in the application. If you are applying for an English Teaching Assistant Award, you'll need to get 3 reference forms completed. All other awards, which would include all of the open study research variations, those will require letters of reference. So in both cases, 3 references. In the case of the ETA, they're forms that are completed. In the case of open study research, those are actual letters. Now, they are submitted completely online. They should not come through you. In fact, there's an opportunity, I think, to waive your right to see those letters. You should do so. They are not sent to us as they would be in many of our other programs. This gets uploaded directly to the online application. In our application walkthrough video, once you progress past step 1, it does explain how to enter those people into your application. If you're at the beginning of the application process, if you're watching this close to the air date of April 17, 2026, now is not the time to trigger that, right? We'd want to trigger that closer to the deadline. We'll talk about timing in a moment. They should remain confidential. And under the applicants tab in the U.S. Student website, there's pretty detailed instructions about how to enter these folks, what instructions they'll give. You can even access the instructions that they receive, so you can see a little bit more detail about how these things are done. I would say the one thing that you should attend to is early and often as you are communicating with these folks, you want to be sure they understand the campus deadline is September 8th. All of the automated correspondence that they will get from Fulbright will mention the national deadline. Yes, we absolutely need it by then, but to do a full review, full assessment of your application, we'd like to have all of those letters in by September 8th. These letters, these references, reference forms, they matter a lot, right? They matter as much as the rest of the application. I'm not trying to spook anyone or freak anyone out. But the letters aren't a checkbox, and I think a lot of times applicants think, "Oh, my references are kind of like when I apply for a job, and that's the last thing they'll check before they give me an offer." No, in a competitive fellowship, the references are an extension of your application, meaning they are providing further data, further insight into you as an applicant that you cannot provide yourself. And it's coming from a credible source, coming from a peer in many cases. And it should confirm most of the things that you say in the application, but also add some things that you can't say about yourself. So they're looking for firsthand observation of the relevant qualities, achievements, and behaviors that they're hoping to see in a Fulbright applicant. And we'll unpack that a little bit. Desirable characteristics, right? We've talked about this a little bit in our other presentations. If you're at Fulbright Day, we talked about it a little bit, but I really thought through, what makes for a strong letter, what makes for a strong Fulbright applicant. And the characteristics I hope to find as a reader are right at the top of that list: flexibility, adaptability, and resilience. Knowing that you're going into an uncertain, ambiguous situation, you're going to be living abroad for a good deal of time. Things are going to change, unexpected things are going to happen. And that's the key characteristic of a Fulbrighter: flexibility, adaptability, and resilience, right? Obviously, and this seems, it's always dangerous to start a sentence with obviously, but it would be helpful to see demonstration of your open-mindedness and your cultural awareness. So we could be thinking of people that have seen you in that situations, either abroad or working with people from a variety of backgrounds, nationalities, ages, income levels, geographic, all the various factors. Are you good at working across cultural boundaries with people that aren't like you, right? For Fulbrighters, I think initiative leadership ability is important because, again, you're not going to have a lot of framework here. You're not going to have a lot of supervision. We would like to know that you're a self-starter. You're somebody that can walk into an uncertain situation and get things organized, right? That when something needs to be done, you're the person that says, all right, here's what we should do, right? That's helpful, right? Also, within that context of cultural awareness, that the American style of leadership maybe doesn't work everywhere, but you are the sort of person that's going to try to help before anything else. Respect, humility, and curiosity, obviously, right? We're sending you in as an ambassador for the United States. We would like you to be curious about other cultures in a respectful and humble way. We would like you to leave behind a positive impression. And I think a lot of that would come from self-awareness, confidence, and above all else, a sense of humor, right? And so these letters, these reference forms are a way to humanize you a little bit to help them see the person that you are, which hopefully is somebody who demonstrates all of these characteristics. Now, the ETA reference forms, the questions in this form are set, and you can actually look at this, if you access the instructions. But the forms essentially are going to ask the reference to discuss your ability to overcome challenges, qualities associated with teaching or mentoring. You don't necessarily have to have had teaching or mentoring experience, but they would like to know, do you have what it takes? Your social skills, ability to work in unstructured environments, likelihood of being a good representative of the United States, and again, those things that we talked about: maturity, adaptability, flexibility, and any kind of relevant experience. So I go through this in detail because I think this should be the frame with which you approach, who do I ask, right? Thinking, who do I know that has some degree of status that could adequately address these questions? And in some cases, that could be a faculty member. In many cases, it will not be. It could be somebody from the community or work or something like that. For the open study research references, it's going to be a 1 or 2 page letter, like a traditional letter of recommendation here, that ideally is going to focus on your ability to execute this proposed work, right? That's the evidence they're looking for to support that claim. I think this applicant will succeed at their proposal because of X, Y, and Z. Uh, it would be helpful if they discussed your preparation for this project, particularly from their point of view. This is the class they took with me. This is what they learned. I've seen them do this research project. They're particularly adept at this, that, or the other. And it would also be helpful if they could talk about your ambassadorial potential, all of those characteristics that we talked about earlier. Um, it could be the case that one letter leans more into 1 or 2 of these areas and maybe not so much in the third. It isn't out of the realm of possibility that you have a letter that does all three, right, equally well, but that's kind of unusual because we present in different ways. So what we would want to think about then is the mix of letters. Maybe we have one letter that's leaning really more into your capabilities and the validity of this project, one that's leaning more into like what you've learned, what you know, and one maybe that's leaning more into your ambassadorial potential, right? And we want to think thoughtfully about that combination. So in your advising meetings, have that conversation because that expectation is going to vary a little bit depending on the nature of your project. If you're applying for a graduate degree award, I would expect to see two letters that are academic in nature, right? And we'll talk more about what that means. They should be, on letterhead, signed by the authors, uploaded to the online system, but all that detail is in our resources. So, as we continue thinking, who do I approach? Who do I ask? How do I do that? The first criterion is that this is somebody who knows you well. You've taken an entire class with them, maybe you've taken two classes with them, maybe you've been in their research group for a couple of years, they've been your boss for 3 or 4 years, you volunteered with them a couple of times, not somebody you've just met. And then that's not to say that somebody who's new in your life can't be a good reference. But again, thinking of the title of this presentation, we want to think about how to cultivate that relationship. Also keeping in mind that the narrative present of your Fulbright application is October. So we are actually forecasting a little bit. So maybe you don't know that person very well right now. Maybe you're just starting to work for them. Well, thinking ahead several months, they'll know you much better by October. So between now and then is a good opportunity for the two of you to get to know each other a little bit better. This person should be relevant to the context, meaning the context of your Fulbright application. Um, yeah, perhaps you've babysat for this family for years and years. They know you super well. There's this lawyer and a doctor and people of great respect in the community, but are they relevant to the context of you wanting to teach English in Timor-Leste, right? And really thinking like, do they have relevant information to share, or is it more general praise? Um, and again, their data is firsthand observation. And so if we get a general letter like, oh, my uncle knows the mayor of our town where I'm from, right? Okay, good. Have they ever actually worked with you? And so those kinds of high prestige types of letters aren't necessarily always useful if they haven't worked with you directly. And they should be credible to the reviewers. So maybe you've got, an endowed professor of mathematics who is going to write a letter for you. Um, but you're applying to study music. Like, okay, I'm glad you did well in their calculus class and they have a high opinion of you, but is this relevant and credible in this particular context, right? So we want to think about all of those things. Like, is this somebody that these readers would find reputable? They should be able to provide detailed firsthand observation. I was there, I saw what they did, I've talked to people that have worked with them. I see in my own evaluation when I graded their papers, anything like that. And ideally, they'd write with some enthusiasm and interest. We don't necessarily need them to be a cheerleader, right? That kind of praise can ring false sometimes, but we want to know that they're a supporter of you, right? And they're willing to put in this little extra effort. And they would enthusiastic enough where they'd be willing to talk to Fulbright directly. Once somebody writes a letter for us, it's not unusual for them to use that letter again in another situation, right? We don't expect them to write a brand new letter every time we apply for something. But we would like them to steer some parts of it, if possible, towards Fulbright, particularly the ambassadorial quality parts, particularly towards your preparedness for extended study abroad. Like, we'd like to see that kind of specificity if possible. I mentioned academic references before. The more academically oriented your project is, let's say graduate study or a fairly scholarly type of research project, we would expect to see at least two academic letters of reference, and that would be, university level faculty members. They've taught you recently, or they've supervised your research in some capacity. They come from an area that's relevant to the work that you're proposing to do, and we would prefer that they have some title that indicates their status within the profession, as opposed to graduate students or postdocs. Um, if you're unsure about that, we can talk about it. If you're really going to get the best letter from a grad student, fine, we'll figure it out. Maybe it's a co-signed letter with somebody else. But we want to make sure that this person's going to, be valid for the readers. Non-academic references are also important. They don't all have to be academic. And in fact, I think for Fulbright, we can really round out a well-rounded application by including some non-academic references. Um, but they should have some professional standing and supervise you in some capacity. A friend or acquaintance is not appropriate, right? But it could be somebody that supervised you in an internship, your boss at work, if you volunteer at your church or in a community organization, or faculty who have advised your student group or anything like that. That can be very valuable because again, thinking about what Fulbright is, it's not just the work, it's you representing the US, being a people person, getting out there in the community. For the ETA, at least one of your references must be non-academic. Uh, ETA depends so much upon these other qualities that they actually specify that one not academic, right? So one must be non-academic. Don't ask your high school teachers, right? By the time you're applying for Fulbright, that should be in the distant past, unless you have maintained a relationship with them and you're still volunteering or something like that. I have seen good letters from high school teachers, but that student kept going back and volunteering or was a guest lecturer at their class or something like that. So it's not that simple. Don't ask one of your friends, and this comes up most often with student organizations. Like you want to ask the president of your student club to write a letter for you. That's fine, but the motivation is on point. But this person probably has not written a lot of letters like this before. This person doesn't necessarily have the experience or the audience awareness to write a strong letter. And most importantly, this audience is not going to perceive them as credible. Even if they are an amazing, talented, well-meaning person, it's just going to ring wrong. And obviously, don't write it yourself. This tends to happen when we ask people who are busy and they say, great, write me a draft and I'll take a look at it. Or well, why don't you just write it yourself? This happens in the military a lot. Just write it yourself and I'll sign off on it, right? Couple of reasons why that's a bad idea. First of all, it's unethical, right? Because you're presenting somebody else's work as your own. We could probably stop there, but let's go on. The other reason it's not effective is that you don't have that same level of perspective that somebody who's been teaching for 25 years does, right? You can't put yourself in the context of the hundreds or thousands of other students that they've taught. Um, you also don't have, the level of expertise to say, well, this program is really valuable because of the following, or I did a Fulbright myself, and I know that, all of these things that come with that validity, which is why we want to ask an experienced person. There may be a little gray area here where they're asking you, hey, could you bullet point some things for me? I don't see any problem with that to give them, it's like, yeah, I think it would be most helpful if you could focus on X, Y, and Z, and just be a partner in that process. But do stop short, kind of like, pretend you're AI here and like say, well, I'm not going to create any text for you, but I'm happy to talk through it. So again, there's several issues there. If this happens to you and you're not sure how to handle it, come talk to me, come talk to us. We've got great ways to deal with it. So as I mentioned, credible, relevant, timely, meaning they've got some kind of status or title that gives them credibility that is relevant to the work that you're proposing to do, and you've known them recently. This is not too stale. When it comes time to ask, and timeline is an important thing to think about, do approach them well in advance. My rule of thumb is polite society would say 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time, right? Some people might say 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. I don't think you should just ask once. I endorse a two-step approach. Um, I'll be honest, I'm a very busy person. I got a lot of things on my plate, and a student emails me to ask about a letter of recommendation, and that email's got like four attachments because it's got their resume and all this other stuff in there, and then this big long wall of text. I'm like, I'm going to flag that for to look at later because that looks like an emotional investment right now. Um, Start with an informal conversation. Just say, hey, I'm going to pass by your office hours next week. I have something I'd like to talk about. Just kind of warm up to that situation and just ask if they'd be willing to do this, right? You don't have to give them all the details up front. Just kind of make sure that they're on board with it. And then in the later step, then you can be more a little crunchier and give them the information. That's what I call the packet, right? When students ask me to write a letter of recommendation, I want their resume, I want some transcripts. Um, if they did some work for me, I'd like to see the writing sample again. It'll help me remember what they did in my class. Uh, Anything else that would be helpful, drafts of your application essays, if you have them, it really helps. And then I can say something very specific. And gentle, frequent reminders are not a bad thing. And when I say gentle, right, you don't want to be a pest, just to say, hey, helpful reminder, short and sweet. Uh, Deadline is 2 weeks away, right? And that's great, right? Because if I agreed to this 6 weeks ago and we're getting into a week away, I owe you that. I've got that social commitment at this point. I'm like, I agreed to do this for this person, and time's getting short. I'm going to move them up to the top of my to-do list. In reality, and I can tell you from somebody that sits on the other side, the majority of people write and submit their letters very close to the deadline. That's just the way life works, right? But there's a big difference between somebody who was asked 3 days before the deadline and who wrote it 3 days before the deadline, right? If I was asked 6 weeks ago, I might wait to 3 days before the deadline, but I'm doing so with the best of intentions and I want to be helpful as opposed to being annoyed, right? So we want to avoid being annoyed. Um, so I tell students, remind me. I have had students not remind me. I have had students ask me 6 weeks out and then that was it. They never checked back in with me. I've actually missed deadlines because of that, and I felt terrible about it. But then when I checked in with the person to whom I was supposed to be sending the letter, they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Their other two letters didn't come in either." So that was a fail. So check in, gentle reminders, be present, be helpful, and be polite and professional in all correspondence. Unless they have given you explicit permission to refer to them by their given name, if they are a professor or they are a doctor, have a PhD, do default to their professional title, professor, doctor, dean, anything like that, right? Unless you know for a fact that you have got developed that casual relationship, the more personal relationship. So err on the side of professionalism when you're corresponding with faculty members and administrators. The way not to ask. Can you write me a letter of reference? Chances are they'll say yes, right? And if you were raised by parents like mine, you would also get chastised for saying, well, I don't know, can I, right? Um, they might agree, but just a yes doesn't mean that they're going to write a good one, doesn't mean that they're enthusiastic about it. And what we would rather do is put some contour to that question. It's like, do you feel that you could write me a strong letter of reference for my Fulbright application? I wanted to ask you because that does a couple of things, right? One, it gives them an out. And you might wonder, why would I want to give them an out here? I'm trying to get a letter from them. Well, if they really don't want to write a letter for you, that's not a letter you want. Or if they don't feel they can write you a strong letter, that's not really a letter you want either. So you want to give them an opportunity to say no. And this happens a lot of times. I'll have students who are applying for medical school ask me for a letter. And like, I don't really think I'm the right person here. I haven't seen you in a clinical setting. I haven't taught you in any of your pre-med courses. You took a class on happiness from me, right? And I'll defer. I'll say, but I'm happy to talk through other potentialities, right? I've had people ask me for law school, and I've said yes because I've seen them in a critical thinking and writing situation. I've seen them doing things they'll need to do in law school, even though I'm not a lawyer. So, that conversation ought to happen. And you don't want them to just write a letter, you want them to write a strong letter. Fulbright, so they know exactly what the audience is. And I wanted to ask you because I think you could talk a lot about blank. You've given them an assignment, right? Otherwise, we're talking about a blank slate. Um, and a lot of times, what they'll default to is sort of resume summary or transcript summary or something like that. Instead, we'd really like them to stay in their lane and talk about the thing that they know most about with regard to you. And also, then I feel a little honored, like, well, I think you've seen me in a leadership situation, or I've grown a lot in your class, or you've really seen my progression over the last 2 years, right? That gives me the warm fuzzies when you point out, like, hey, here's why I think so highly of you, right? So I think that's helpful as well. So we want to get that enthusiastic yes out of this, not just a, well, I guess I could. And throughout the process, be a good partner, right? Communicate early and often, check in to see if they need anything. Hey, here's some more materials. I know you don't have time to look at all this, but here's an article I wrote. If you're revising your materials, it would be helpful to share your statement of grant purpose, any of your personal essays. And as you're doing that, I would really recommend that as an opportunity to get some feedback to say, hey, I would welcome some, input on my statement of grant purpose. You're an expert in this area. I'm really curious to know if what you would think. And then that increases the social commitment, right? Now they've got a dog in the hunt because they've given you some time, and now they're invested in your success even more so. And you've gotten feedback from an expert, right? So, show gratitude. Thank you notes are great. I've got one right here that I just got from a student. I cherish these things, right? I have a whole shelf full of these in my office. And I look at those thank you cards and I remember that relationship with the student and I remember their success. And it's like my own little trophy shelf. So buy them a gift, buy them a bar of chocolate, buy them a Starbucks card. They understand if you're a student, you don't have a lot of money. And I have gifts all around my office that students have given me to show that gratitude. And I think that's really important. And it's also psychologically good for you. All right. It does increase your own well-being to practice that gratitude. And lastly, and most importantly, keep them up to date. I'm alarmed sometimes at how many times students I guess we'll just assume that people will find out that they won or didn't win, but let them know if you progress to semifinalists. Get them cheering for you. Bring some good energy into the world, right? Let them know if you've won. That's a great time to also deliver that act of gratitude. Um, and so many times I have faculty emailing me, it's like, so whatever happened to so and so? Did they win? Or I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't tell them? So yeah, keep them involved, right? And it's a great way to curate that relationship. I still email my own mentors on a regular basis, just do some life check-ins like, hey, just curious what you're up to. I saw you just published a new article. I've been reading it. I'm really impressed. And here's what's happening in my life. And, once as a mentor, you've put some time into somebody, you've put some of yourself into them. And you'd like to know, hey, how did it turn out? What's the rest of the story? So, as you move forward, one of the things that you'll have access to is our memorandum of guidance, which is a PDF that we recommend you give to folks once they've agreed to write for you. It explains our timeline, explains the process, and it highlights what goes into a strong letter for Fulbright. As I mentioned, under the applicants tab on the Fulbright US student site, there is some extra good information about when you look in the application components section about references, what should go into it, and then a link to the actual instructions that they get. So you can be really well informed on what happens there. And me, right? Any of the advising staff, of course, but I'm the one that, with a faculty rank, and I probably have the best ability to coordinate with other faculty members and talk to them. And I'm happy to look at letters too. I got people every year that send me drafts of their letters of reference because they're so invested in your success that they want to be sure they're doing a really good job. And I am delighted to review those letters and give pointers. Happy to do that. The top priority for me. So, where do we go from here? Well, if you haven't done your intake meeting yet, be sure you go ahead and schedule that. Pick your own adventure, pick one of the three routes. If I just had this meeting this week where the student was like, I'm not sure if I want to do graduate degree. I'm like, well, schedule another step one and do ETA. It's a different conversation, right? And she's like, great, I think I'll do that. Nothing wrong with that. We don't have to be in a hurry right now, but we do have to be thoughtful. We're building the foundation for your application. Once you've had that step one meeting, you'll get further instructions as to what to do next, and that would include opening an application and scheduling your step two meeting. Our website, of course, great place to go to access our YouTube page, schedule appointments, of course, fulbright.asu.edu, which actually does live right on that same page, but the Fulbright page on the ONSA website has up-to-date information about our timeline, FAQs, things like that. And again, the Fulbright online.org site, the end-all be-all of everything that you need to know about the program this cycle. So thank you for your time and attention. I do appreciate that. See, their little act of gratitude. And I'm happy to field any questions if anyone here today has them at this point. So welcome to unmute, throw it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. All right, last call. Fair enough. Well, thank you all for your time and attention. And again, we'll be cycling back, I think, for two more Fulbright Fridays. Going forward, I think if my memory serves me correctly, it's a two-part session on how to create and how to approach designing a research project. If you're thinking about open study research, our past sessions have included ETA for all majors and careers. as well as how to strategically approach program choices for the graduate degree award. So if either of those interest you and you haven't seen them, those are available on our YouTube page. And once you get into our Canvas, they'll be available there as well. So thank you all for your time and attention, and have a great weekend.